There you have it, folks. That's my Licorice alive, a cappella-wise, with Thelonious' iconic blues head, Blue Monk. It was recorded originally in 1954, composed by Thelonious, and became one of the all-time blues standards in the jazz repertoire, and it actually represented a harmonic leap forward in the growth of jazz across the large canvas of the 20th century. And Thelonious was a giant in his own right, not really totally appreciated in his own time, but it took a decade or so, maybe even less, less for the musicians to catch up to him, but about a decade for the audiences and the public at large to latch on to the genius that was Thelonious Monk. And there is my little offering on the licorice stick, and I hope you dug it. So welcome, friends, subscribers, and countrymen, to another installment of Rebel Without Applause, coming to you from where else? My movie studio apartment right here in the Wood of the Holly, under the sign overlooking the enchanted land of law. And as always, I'm doing my best to break it down jazz-wise, joke-wise, and otherwise as I explore the netherworld of my brain and hopefully shed a little light into yours. And today, we are going to take a left turn, a little departure from the normal format, and we are going to break it down book-wise, or rather literary-wise, with a very special guest, Adrian Maher. He's a raconteur, journalist, documentarian, friend, and now, yes, you can say it, in all its unvarnished glory, a published author. And I'm holding in my hand his latest and first literary offering. It's called Uninvited, Confessions of a Hollywood Party Crasher. Adrian Maher, congratulations.
Thank you, Bill.
There it is, sitting there on the desk. You did it. How does it feel?
Well, to write this book, Uninvited, Confessions of a Hollywood Party Crasher, I kind of lived it for 20 years, and I wrote it over 18 months, and it just feels incredible to finally have this done, finished. And now the real adventure starts, talking about it and with people like you.
Well, I have to say, honestly, as your friend who's seen this process, not necessarily with a front row seat, but let's say a loge seat, about 15 rows back from the front lines, I have recollections of actually being in some of these parties that you've crashed, with you holding the door open for me. I could not have done it myself. I have recollections of when you originally had an idea about how do I, you were pitching the book to various publishers, and, you ran some of the ideas by me, and then finally, I read a number of chapters, and I read the complete thing as of yesterday, and it's really, I want to just get this off the table immediately. The book is fucking good. It's fun. It takes you to a place in the land of law that maybe isn't so enchanted, and it feels real, it feels authentic, and it feels lived because you lived it.
I did, and I became fascinated by this group of party crashers. I saw them when I was a reporter at the LA Times. I would see them at event after event. They'd be at the bar. They'd be belling up to the buffet table. And I was going to write a story on this group, this subculture, for the LA Times. Then I lost my job.
So you never wrote the actual article?
Never wrote the actual article for the LA Times. But when I got laid off by the LA Times, I still had all the contact numbers of some of these crashers. And I was in a very tough time in my life. I'd lost my job at the LA Times. My mother was dying of pancreatic cancer. And I just thought, I need to get out with this group of crashers and do a daily adventure. I mean, I was so stunned by the world that they're in, the kind of daily life they live.
So when this whole thing, when you started this journey into this culture, it wasn't, you were introduced to it through your work, at the LA Times. But when the LA Times said adios to you and about 300 other reporters in journalism, as we know it, ceased to exist. And all these, Damon Runyons and, H.L. Menckens were cast adrift in the land of law. You found this world, but you didn't go, I'm going to write a book about this. It just, at least from what I get, that it was just the cool culture. You wanted a part of it.
Right. Because of everything I was quite frankly fairly depressed. And I thought kind of plugging into this group of party crashers would get me out of the house, would introduce me to some interesting people. And that's what it was. It just became this daily adventure. And I kind of got sucked into it over many, many years. And after many years of people listening to my stories, they said, you ought to write a book on this. This has never been written about. It's never been covered, really. Mm-hmm. And that was the big motivation, was to write this kind of personal narrative, how I stumbled into this subculture, what I went through, and finally writing this book.
So it was a culture that you could feel. It was around you your whole life.
Right. As I was growing up on the west side of L.A., those mythical parties were always up in the hills. I used to hear about these incredible parties, these incredible events. It was the Playboy Mansion or up in the Hollywood Hills. And eventually I got into these parties and using all kinds of strange motives, but living in the flatlands growing up.
Right.
And eventually I kind of made it up into the hills.
And I grew up in the valley. The hills were north of you, and they were south of me. And for me, growing up in the West Valley, those Santa Monica Mountains might as well have been the fucking Himalayas, okay? Because everything that was interesting and happening in culture in LA was happening on the other side of the mountains. And so for me, it was like, how do I get out of the fucking valley?
Right.
And here I am. I'm out of the valley, but I'm still not getting into these parties. I need some tips,
Yeah. Well, you've been reading my books. There's lots of tips. I mean, I think, again, LA is a kind of social dystopia. It's very spread out. It's very difficult to connect with people. Mm-hmm. This was the one social activity that I really found you can connect with people. When you meet someone in Costco here, you try to approach someone, it's either going to end in your arrest or theirs. And with this, you're in a shared themed environment. You've been so vetted outside the gates. You're inside these parties. People finally let their hair down. People finally relax. They talk to each other. You can approach people. That was always my motivation. Some of the other people that I ran into, they do have these one of them has a weird swag fetish. That's all he cares about is swag. Others are into trying to hobnob with celebrities, which has never really interested me. Others are in for the free food and alcohol. Some are all the above.
So would there be the party crasher personality profile? I'm in the FBI. I need a party crasher profile. Is there a profile that you could sort of describe for us of who this motley crew might be?
There are probably about 24 party crashers that are full-time in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, on every given night. I used to think, why aren't there more people doing this?
Right.
And the reason there are not more people doing this is it's intensely stressful. It's just anxiety-inducing, the security, the gates. But there's a feeling among all of us we're outsiders wanting in. We're the 99% that wants to get behind those 1% hedge gates.
Yeah, I mean, the whole city is velvet roped off. As a screenwriter, I remember, I'll tell you the story. I may have mentioned it before. I was talking to this guy who was an assistant at a big agency, ICM, and he was so frustrated because he was treated like shit there. He was disposable. The body parts of the assistants were in the dumpster behind the agency. And he says, dude, I don't know, how will I ever become an agent or somebody? And I said, listen, pal, Hollywood's no different than France in the 1540s. You want to be a knight, you got to slay a dragon.
Hollywood is one of the most hierarchical societies in the world. The hedge gates, the German shepherds, the non-return phone calls. And in a way, this whole group of us, we don't want to be outside the palace gates, outside the moat. We want to be inside. Now, why do we want to be inside? I mean, there is some kind of psychological feeling of being an outsider, wanting to get behind those gates of the 1%.
Reading it felt to me also that it was addictive, like the rush. Okay, I got in. And then the next morning, it's like, okay, I need another hit and another hit. And was it addictive?
Well, I do notice in some of my fellow party crashers, even I myself got caught up, is I would get in some parties and would notice my fellow crashers 5 minutes in, they're already looking for the next party. It's a great party. You've got beautiful view, food, wine, everything's great. And already they're looking at their cell phones. They can't just enjoy the moment. Some people I know go to 7 events a night. I mean, it's insane. You're there for 5 minutes, all that queasiness, all that anxiety of getting in. Once in, you're looking for the next one. It's the fear of missing out on the other party.
Or just the hit of the excitement of getting in.
Well, it's that massive dopamine hit of getting inside where you don't belong.
I felt that doing stand-up, is that there was a period in my life where if I didn't get on stage and do a stand-up set somewhere, I was pissed off. I was angry. It was like I needed it to get off. It was like ejaculatory stoppage. I needed to get on fucking stage, otherwise I was going to be a killer. And for me personally, I had to go through a crisis of like, this is not a sustainable thing for me. And I don't know, I'm feeling that a little bit with your experience.
Well, I think a lot of these other crashers have different motivations. Some of them want swag. Others are into the sense daily adventure. Others are into this just sheer rush of adrenaline and queasiness and anxiety. My motivation has always been to just meet people. It is the most effective way, again, to get to a shared theme environment. You've been vetted. You're inside a party. People talk to each other, finally. In L.A., people don't talk to each other. The only spiritual communion is on the freeway. And
fuck you cut me off.
Yeah, and this is one way I found. There's not only the community of other crashers who you get to know very well. I know some of them better than my own family. But it's in an environment that is exclusive, which then allows people to connect much more deeply, much more spontaneously.
Reading the book, the crashers are way more interesting than the celebrities.
Yeah, exactly, Bill.
Yeah.
They have very interesting jobs by day. Some are real estate moguls, some are biochemists, some are lawyers, and at night they changed into kind of Cape Crusader outfits, and they crash these parties. And many of them say, hey, we get in, we're raising the level of social discourse. We're starting little social bonfires and bringing the level of the party up. That's how some of them rationalize it to themselves.
And they probably did.
They do. Many of them are very, very interesting. They're very bold. They're courageous. They're willing to risk total embarrassment, which is what keeps a lot of people from joining in the fun.
Oh, yeah. Humiliation is a very powerful repellent.
A public perp walk out of a very large venue with cameras everywhere, and most people could never even conceive of handling that.
Right.
This is something that my fellow party crashers handle constantly.
So you did this. You're at one moment, you're a party crasher. Another, you have the soul of a writer and a social observer. So as this is going on, even at its inception, I imagine you taking notes or, cataloging your recollections.
Well, absolutely. When I would first go on these crasher forays, one of the first things I saw was just all the tools some of these crashers have. I mean, they have bags with thousands of colored wristbands. They have ultraviolet light ink stamps. They have clipboards. They have earpieces. It's just unbelievable the toolkits they have in the back of their car. The first time I ever saw it, this crasher just opened up the trunk of his car, and I could not believe what was inside. Champagne glasses, wigs, baseball caps, Velcro mustaches. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Talk about your toolkit.
Well, I have just some basic wristbands that I use, and I have all kinds. Rubber, I have paper in a million different colors. And that's the most valuable thing I have is all these colored wristbands in what I call my medical tote bag.
This thing started like in the early 2000s for you?
Yes, it kind of started in the late 90s when I was leaving the LA Times. I then got into this whole world. And I would say probably for the next 20 years, it's been my main social outlet. I've had 3 long-term girlfriends that I've met crashing events. One of them was a crasher herself, Bathsheba, and she's outlined throughout the book. And I just find it's so different being able to go to these events that have this exclusivity, but they have this openness once you're inside them, versus trying to go to a bar or a nightclub and try to connect with someone, or over online with Tinder or Bumble. This is a face-to-face way that people open up.
I love the Schwarzenegger break-in.
I was going up Mandeville Canyon, which is in Brentwood. I was going to this one big fundraiser by this nonprofit called Chrysalis, which tries to find jobs for low-income Angelenos. And I kind of went into the party for a few minutes, didn't really like it. It was a sit-down. No one likes sit-down dinners. I walked out of the party. I saw another party across the street, so I went up this vertical driveway, ended up in this huge house with pictures of the Kennedys all over the place. And I'm just thinking, this is a house of a very important person or personality. And the next minute, I got a poke in the ribs, and I just heard this, so glad to have you here. I just want to thank you so much. I turned around. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was hosting the fundraiser for this party. And I was so stunned. I just remember, backstepping and just saying, we're doing all we can, And
was he governor at that time?
No, he was not governor. He was out of office, but he had. I was amazed by the diversity of the crowd. I mean, it was many different races. There were bodybuilders there. There were athletes there. There were all kinds of people there. And, of course, he was his charming best. His host.
And
thought I was someone else, obviously.
Did you happen to catch him with his housekeeper by any chance?
No. The Sperminator was on his best behavior that night. He was not flirting with anybody. He was the host. He was very charming. Again, just an amazing guy. Businessman, movie actor. One of the greatest books ever written is his book on Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding. I mean, the guy is just an amazing guy. His house is just incredibly decorated.
So this
furnished.
was before that blew up with Maria Shriver.
It had already blown up. The Maria Shriver had already happened before. So,
but he was in the house with Kennedy pictures. So that would
all the pictures. I mean, that was the famous story. Maria Shriver, after the incident with the maid, said, "Okay, Arnold, you're gonna have to move out." And he goes, "You move out. I'm staying here." And so she wasn't there. So, but all the Kennedy pictures were still up, et cetera, et cetera.
I used to say, as you said, he was an iconic bodybuilder, a real estate mogul, and an actor. Albeit, in my view, I had always thought that he was not a very good actor until what happened with Maria. He had an affair with his maid. Was it two kids or one kid with the maid in the same house, and she didn't know for 10 years. For years, I thought he was a terrible actor. No, he's a fucking genius. Yeah. Talk about a performance.
Yeah, no, he's an incredible personality to meet, and it was amazing to be inside his house. I mean, that was the funny thing. I've used many, and I've seen many techniques used to crash parties over many, many years. I've seen crashers go in wheelchairs and tuxedos into the side door of the Golden Globes. I have seen other people in tuxedos hold a glass of champagne, walk back and forth in front of security, and then quickly turn to them and say, "Oh, I'm not supposed to drink out here, am I?" And they know, "No, you got to come right in." There are just so many techniques and tactics that are absolutely brilliant when you really think about it.
So since the early 2000s till this moment, we've seen just technology completely revolutionize our world. What's the future for party crashers?
Well, Bill, that's a great question, because the surveillance technology is increasing drastically. I've seen this over the years. Check-in now is not with a manual clipboard, it's with an iPad. You have to show your driver's license. You really feel that the surveillance technology beginning to constrict party crashers and their access. I mean, Chinese democracy has now come to Hollywood. There are cameras everywhere. Uh-huh. I've even heard stories now of bouncers going up to potential party crashers that are in an event, taking their pictures. When those crashers try to show up again at another party with the same security company, they're faces are already in the system, and they're stopped at the gates.
Facial recognition.
Facial recognition.
So
Exactly.
I'm guessing that your face is already in the database.
I hope it isn't. I had one party. I brought in a potted plant. That's how I got in. The next minute, some bouncers came up to me. One of the bouncers had an iPad next to my head and brought his manager over and was scrolling through all these crashers right next to my head. Is this him? Is this him? Is this him? And luckily, I couldn't believe how many of these crashers were on this iPad. Luckily, mine wasn't. And so the manager, after they scrolled through this kind of Halloween gallery of other crashers, said to me, listen, I really apologize. We didn't mean to do that to you. You know, we also thought you brought in a potted plant, and obviously it's not you. Go ahead and have a drink.
Well, hopefully this book will vault you into a different status, and the red carpet is waiting for you and a gilded entry. I imagine when you actually get invited to these parties, it'll be a nightmare.
Well, there is a kind of saying, I don't go to parties I'm invited to. At this stage of my life, I'm tired of going through the hedges, jumping walls, walking up beachfront properties in my wingtips at midnight. I'd like to go through the front door, finally.
Talk about Avi.
Well, Avi was probably my biggest party crasher partner over many years. We met doing documentaries together for the History Channel, National Geographic, and he was this fearless ex-intelligence agent, Israeli, and we together just, again, there's a saying with reporters, if you go out to war, you always go in twos. If you go in ones, you're vulnerable. If you go three or more, you're a crowd, but you always go out in twos. And when I crashed parties over the years, Avi was my main partner, just an amazing personality, just able to sniff out trouble before it even thought of raising its head, had creative responses when we were stopped by security. Just an amazing character and one of my greatest friends.
Now, I'll tell you that I don't want to give away the book, but one of the great chapters or anecdotal arcs in the story to me was Hugh Hefner. And starting when you're in high school, you know, with the fantasy of the mansion. And
well, yeah, it's I think every prepubescent boy in high school or junior high is reading Playboy. And I went to a Halloween party. That was the big party that Hef threw at the mansion every year.
How did you hear about it?
It was all over the Crasher Network. Everybody knows one of the best parties of the year is Hefner's Playboy Mansion party. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I got up there. I was able to get a wristband from a departing person down at the UCLA shuttle depot where they were shuttling people up. And I was with Avi, and we put our wristbands on and went right up to the gates. And we were able, they let us in. I said I had to pick someone up. They let us in. I ditched my car up there, and we just melted into the party. And it was just, yeah, it was unbelievable. Lots of old men and very young women on Xanax and other types of pharmaceutical drugs. Not a great place, I found. It was like the Wizard of Oz. You pull back the curtain, and it definitely had its depravity.
What period of Hef's life would this have been?
This period would have been, Hefner was kind of dating 7 women at the time, but he was getting older. And all the tell-alls came out around 2014, 2015. Down the Rabbit Hole by Holly Madison, and again, just this aging, doddering satyr with all these young women 60 years younger than him. And it was kind of the last days of the Playboy empire. It was kind of the end of an era. And that's what I saw when I finally got up there. It was kind of like ancient Rome with, Hef kind of being wheeled around with little devil horns on.
It's like the last days before Archduke Ferdinand was shot in Europe. You describe it very vividly with the furniture and the furnishings being tattered and worn.
Yeah, exactly. And as I look back over these Crasher scenes over many years, I mean, I still can't believe some of the scenes. Larry Flint at the Santa Monica Airport, his 35th anniversary for Hustler magazine, arriving in his big jet and literally coming down the stairs in a wheelchair with all these half-naked women kneeling along a red carpet into one of the hangars, and to just see him coming down like a crippled Caligula. I can't get the scene out of my mind. I describe it in my book.
Well, it sounds like the last moment before the Me Too bomb hit.
Right. Well, I just, again, this kind of sex castle on the hill, from my time in high school, my friends and I always wanted to get up there. I tried to get a catering job up there one summer. I tried even to go to the dark side and get a job with security, just anything to get in there. And when I finally got in 25 years later, it really looked like the last days of Rome. You could sense the decay. Many of the men were all in their 70s and 80s, B-list actors and actresses. And then all the women were kind of in their late teens, early 20s. It just really felt like the last days of Rome, this kind of end of an era, the depravity, and half again with all these older men in attendance. He doesn't like any young blades at his parties. And the security there was so oppressive. And that's the other thing. As I've been going out, I've had so many moments. I remember I was going to a movie premiere after party at the Sunset Tower in Hollywood, and I was able to get through the first ring of security in the lobby, got up to the top, and this woman just confronted me and said, "Who are you with? Who are you with? Are you with Benedict?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm with Benedict. Great friend, the whole thing." She goes, "There's no Benedict here, Beavis. It's time for you to get out of here."
And how did that feel?
Didn't feel too good. Yeah. And riding that elevator back down to the ground floor, flanked by two huge rhino neck bouncers.
Yeah, but of course, ultimately the legal jeopardy for crashing a party, I don't know what it is. I guess ultimately it could be trespassing.
I think the biggest thing everyone's scared about is just the public humiliation of being pointed out at a party. You're an interloper, an infiltrator, an outsider. And getting that poke in the ribs, getting that tap on the shoulder, and turned around and publicly perp walked out of the party. It's not a good feeling.
No.
And I had one time I went to the Viceroy Hotel. There was a big food type event, and I didn't go through the front. I decided to go through the Achilles heel of any building, which is the kitchen. I made it in. I went through all these hallways, made it out to the pool. Was standing there with a highball in hand with some other crashers. And two big security guards came up to me and they said, what are you doing? Why did you come through the kitchen? And I said, well, yeah, I just went up for a smoke. I gave some quick excuse. And they said, well, you didn't have to do that. The party's open to the public. You could have just come right through the front door here.
You outsmarted yourself. I'll tell you, a place that really strikes me as, I don't know if it's like Mecca for party crashers, is the first week of the Sundance Film Festival.
Well, the Sundance Film Festival, Bill, is the party crasher paradise. They're film brunches, there's seminars, there's dinners, there's huge parties up in the hills. I was with Avi. We went for a number of times, but our first big time was in roughly around 2004. There was one point we were going to one party, staying 20 minutes, then going to the next party up the street, then trying to crash through the back door, sliding down snowbanks for the third party. And after about 8 parties that night, we realized the same Sky Vodka, same caterers, same people. We realized we had come full circle. We were now back at the very first party that we'd started at. And we were looping, literally. And finally, he just turned to me and said, maybe we should focus on the movies here. This is just getting completely out of control.
Yeah.
And
hopefully just the documentaries. I find the feature films, I've written and directed one, and my movie was famously rejected by Sundance, that once, I don't know what it is, if it's physics, but if a movie's projected at above 5,000 feet, something that is unwatchable at sea level can be hailed as a masterpiece.
Yeah,
on
exactly.
Sundance.
I think of the altitude up there does something to people's heads, but the alcohol consumed, the altitude, all the locals have a description of all the Hollywood types that come up. They call them men in black, because they're skiing down the slopes there at Park City, and they're all on their cell phones with their black turtlenecks, talking the jargon. One of the big parties every year is the night before party for the Oscars. It's always held at the Beverly Hills Hotel,
Right.
known as the Pink Palace. And Avi and I were able to go through some fire exits and up and down freight elevators. We finally got in. I saw my old boss bending over the sushi table. I went over and I grabbed him in a big friendly way. I grabbed his shoulders. I was shaking him and turned him around, and it was Clint Eastwood. So Clint Eastwood is looking at my howling face like a foot away. And I just realized I put my hands on an A-list celebrity. The radio traffic was lit up. Security was running over. I just said, Clint, you're looking great, like I knew him. And he leaned down and said, well, thanks, fella. Thanks. And I just bolted and hid out for the next 20 minutes. I ran into Avi, and his first words were, do you realize you just assaulted an icon? So, and with that, we just took off. Anyway, his face is still etched in my memory.
Yeah, well, he's etched in a lot of people's memories from a million movies. I feel like what comes out of this book, of course, it's anecdotally hilarious, and it does offer up a portrait of our city in this turn of the millennial moment, and to me, it's alternately incredibly corrupt and incredibly glorious at the same time.
Right. Again, I think that celebrities are the new royalty. And there are many other crashers that I know. That's all they want to do is have a selfie with a celebrity. I was never interested in that. I really just wanted to connect with some other folk in a shared themed environment where people could be themselves, to get in those hallowed gates. And that was always my main motivation. If you're a celebrity, you have different laws that apply to you. You get seated at the prime table at restaurants. You live a different life than you and I live. There's just a whole different set of rules, of procedures, of rituals. And again, when you meet many of them face to face, they're not on that 70-foot screen anymore. And that's why I've always thought some of these other party crashers are way more interesting than the celebrities themselves.
Years ago, I had the opportunity of flying first class across the country, and seated behind me was Meryl Streep. But she was snoring the whole trip, and her face was kind of crushed against her pillow right behind me. Who knew? She's a human being.
Exactly. And I went to the Paul McCartney Music Cares gala in 2012, and I got in, and there was no place to sit. Every table was jammed. 3,000 people were not going to give up their tickets to a live Beatle. I finally found a chair, a table, a round table. I sat down, right, and I looked over and I saw James McCartney. And I'm thinking, that's funny. If James McCartney, Paul McCartney's son, is at this table, this must be an important table. The next minute, I felt this hot, burning gaze. I turned, and there was this woman with these enormous bug sunglasses on, Yoko Ono. And she just said, "Who you?" And I was so stunned. I just stood up and I said, "I'm me." And I just bowed to one and all. I said, "Gentle folk, it's now time for me to take my leave." And I had Olivia Harrison looking at me, James McCartney, I'd been sitting in Paul McCartney's seat. I think my goal with this book was to turn a spotlight on this whole celebrity culture. Again, the worship of false idols, these incredible settings. They really do live different lives than you and me, than the 99%, the great unwashed outside the palace gates. And my goal was to also turn a spotlight on myself. What were my motivations? How did I get into all this? What kind of person was I becoming? And I try to take the reader on a whole journey through all these different dimensions and worlds. And I do I'll save it for the end, you'll have to read the book, to a series of great realizations about LA and about myself.
Where are people going to be able to get this book, either in digital form or in hard copy form?
You can get my book, Uninvited, Confessions of a Hollywood Party Crasher, on Amazon. You can get it on indiebound.org. You can get it on Barnes & Noble's website. You can also go to my personal website, adrianmaher.com. And the book will also be available in audiobook or on Kindle, an e-reader. I did the audio for my audiobook with about 25 different accents. Not only did I do the narrator, voice of God, but I also did about 25 other accents for the audiobook, including Clint Eastwood, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Yoko Ono. I did them all, and I also highly recommend checking the audiobook out.
What a thrilling opportunity to actually get the lead role in your own life. 10,000 congratulations on your accomplishment. People know now where to get it. When does it come out? What's the published date?
So the published date is November 5th, 2019. Best to get your pre-order in now.
And you can do that.
You can do that right now on Amazon or indiebound.org or Barnes & Noble. All the websites you can find my book and pre-order now. November 5th is the launch date.
So we're, about 3.5 weeks out from your march to glory and literary recognition and a brand new chapter in your life. I want to say thanks again, brother, for coming here and sharing with me your fantastic accomplishment. I take special pleasure not only in reading the book, but being a part of your life and watching how this germinated from a pitch to a book. And if there's one thing I respect is when people say they're going to do something and they do it.
Bill, thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to do this interview, and I appreciate you reading the book in depth and asking some great questions.
And so, all my friends, countrymen, and subscribers, I want to thank you for hanging with me and Adrian. Until next time, please don't forget to grab this book. It's worth your time. And until next time, adios, goodbye,